We're rolling, man.
Oh, we're rolling.
Yeah,
right
we're
now?
rolling. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, it's going right now.
Okay.
So, welcome everyone to the Wanderlost podcast. This is episode 1. Really excited about doing this. Basically, the reason that I wanted to do this is going to be totally separate from the vlog, and it's going to be totally separate from the documentaries. I wanted to just get some people in here that have interesting perspectives and have really casual conversations about a variety of topics, things that are very current to today's world. So today, episode 1. Want to introduce yourself?
My name is Michel Le Gendre. I'm the development coordinator at Corporate Accountability International, and we're an organization that challenges transnational corporate abuses against people, the environment, and our democracy. And I've been there for about a year now on staff, but I was also there as an intern and a volunteer for a year, so it's been a fun time.
Yeah. And, I mean, in the sake of transparency, I interned at Corporate Accountability for a summer. That was 2 years ago now.
That was a while ago.
I think that was 2 summers ago.
It was
something
a while
like
ago, for sure.
Yeah.
I think I might have been a senior or an apprentice at that point.
Yeah, you were an apprentice, and then I think you had just been hired.
Yeah,
during that summer.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you were now leaving, I was now on staff. So, yeah, I've had some time with Jesse.
Yeah, we've had some time together. Yeah. So I thought it would be really interesting for us to talk about, because we're both in the camp that people would call millennials.
I'd say so, yeah.
And there's so much contention right now about the current presidential campaign and all the different people running for president.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I thought maybe we could talk about that. I think there's a lot of meat there. Mm-hmm. And I think you and I both have some interesting opinions about the current campaign.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because there's a lot of polarization that's going on in the sake of getting votes, and I don't think it's any longer about being a conservative or being a liberal. It's much more about really divisive issues that are at the core of someone's life. So, for instance, immigration, and that being lined up with poor, lower-income communities of predominantly Caucasian communities, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That are upset over the fact that they're losing their jobs, that are upset over outsourcing, and they find some hope in people that are here's how I villainize a community, and then you attack that, and that's the crux of the issues. That it's no longer about how do we make sure that the problem we identify has a solution, and then as politicians we go about finding those solutions. It's about how do we garner the votes and the movement for that without bringing forth any solutions, but more so identifying another group as the problem.
Yeah, it seems to be not so much from someone like Bernie Sanders, but more so from the Republican side, that it's more figuring out what people's fears are, mm-hmm. and sort of calling out those fears and being you should be afraid of these things, but if you elect me, I'll try and make it so that you don't have to be afraid of these things.
Yeah, I guess so. I think it's definitely the Republican side has been on that, but I think even Democrats, the institutional camp of Democrats, has been much more in a malaise of sorts. They can just get the progressive vote, that they can just get the African-American vote and the groups of minorities, and that isn't the case this time.
Mm.
And I feel that has shown in just the polls that have been coming out, that people aren't okay with just the status quo.
Yeah.
People aren't okay with just the narrative of that America has to be the global power, America has to be showing its power in military force, which as a Democrat and a Republican has worked in the past. And people are understanding that the far-reaching impact of just how do we, as a democracy, as the smaller demographics within our nation, how do we correct those things that have a far-reaching impact globally? Because having a secure workforce and having really refined social justice issues solved, and having these different camps of people feeling more satisfied with the democracy that they're building has a huge impact over countries like Africa, or like continents like Africa, and countries like Ghana and Burundi and all these places that are going through their own issues of that sort. And then they look to the U.S. and they partner with the U.S. and they see corporate interest and corporate development as their way out.
I think you bring up an interesting topic. I think for a long time people looked to America as like the leading example, probably not always for the better. I think we've probably had we've set some very poor examples in the past. You know, you look at like the 1950s and 60s, you know, I think when people say the slogan, let's make America great again, what was that? Like, when was America so great? Like, if you're pointing to the 50s, it was great if you were a white male. Like, yeah, I'm sure America was great for you back then. That was like nirvana if you were a white, like, upper class male in the 50s. But do we really want to, like, if you look at the problems we had back then, is that really what we want to go back to? Shouldn't we be trying to set some better examples?
Yeah.
If people are going to be looking to us as a leader, as this like global leader that we like to call ourselves, I feel like we should put forth some good examples.
Yeah, and I think another part of that possibly could be that we can always look to the past and look at the like 2020 vision of what was great about the past. But with that is always the issues that come about. And if you don't look forward and use history as a guide of like what are the good and the bad, then you just fall into this trap of, you know, the gleaning over everything negative that had to be sacrificed to make those good things happen. You know, like you've got racial tension that brought about a huge economic boom because it was an assimilation of the workforce into better standing that made a great American model. And you've got different issues like the war on drugs. Maybe some of the reason that economic model was so helpful in the time was that drug money was flowing into this country. So you can't just chalk it up to the political climate or a specific politician at the time who was our president, like Ronald Reagan, and say that was the best case for America because there were so many things that played into it. I think we look back and we're like, oh, that timing was so great, but everything negative that had to happen to make that like one good thing is just not beneficial, I don't think, and it doesn't help us at all when we're looking forward. And I also do have an issue with like this idea of making America great again because we're so selfish. Yeah. If we like think like it's about America, like it's about like how great America is. There's no insight into, you know, there's some really terrifying things that are going on globally. There are Amazonian forests that are being bought and auctioned off. There are ports in different countries that are developing that are being rented out to other larger countries for economic gain, and then they're sacrificing their own integrity. They're basically like putting like the growth of that country ahead of the environmental impact against their own. So, you know, we can make America great or to whatever level we want, but the more we think like that, the farther we move away from this new economy and this new globalized world that we're stepping into, which is really scary to think that we're that selfish at this point. Yeah,
I think this is just one like little example about, you know, let's make America great again, or like, oh, it's America's so amazing. My girlfriend, so her family is from Honduras, and her family lives in kind of a poor neighborhood. They're like upper middle class, but the neighborhood is still very much developing. And in like the major cities and in that area, a lot of people get kidnapped. Like a lot of the time they get kidnapped and held for ransom. What's interesting though is that people there think America is crazier because there people are doing it for money and potentially killing people for money. Whereas here we have so many mass shootings for literally no reason. Like there's not even reasoning behind it. And it's just like, it's interesting when you think about how other nations look at America. And, I was thinking about how you said we shouldn't just be looking towards the past. We have to be looking towards the future and maybe like learning from our examples in the past. And I think it's tough because I think sometimes living in like Boston in the Northeast where it's much more liberal, sometimes you can just get these like liberal goggles on and you don't always see the problems in the rest of the country. So I try and keep an open mind. But when I think about someone like Bernie Sanders wanting to adopt examples set by like Denmark, and people say, yeah, but Denmark has a much smaller population. There's obviously going to be much smaller issues. That's true, but Denmark has done things that have worked, and shouldn't we at least try? I feel like, we can learn from other places too. We shouldn't just be the only ones setting examples for the rest of the entire world.
Yeah, and I think that, I studied political science, so studying it and living it and being a part of it is very different. So I haven't been into the political science realm that most people take after college, but one of the main points of it is to compare, analyze, and figure out what are the best scenarios to develop. And you look at different case studies that are similar and in track and see where the results of different policies land. And it's interesting because, Bernie Sanders isn't the be-all, end-all for what we absolutely need in this country. But yeah. I think that one thing that we can take away from the movement is this idea of how people advocating for what they believe in and shifting the narrative across the nation politically is important. And if there's people that are saying for the first time in a long time with a huge economic voice in terms of voting number and turnout for these policies that could be mirrored in how Denmark and Scandinavian countries control their politics both economically and socially, that's important to take note of. And it's important that we recognize that that's part of democracy. So you can say that oh man, these kids don't know what they're talking about. Capitalism is the greatest system and it's helped me. But if that many people are turning up to the voting polls and are saying, we are so dissatisfied with how capitalism has turned out in our lives and we need to adjust it, I think that for me is the biggest indicator. It's not necessarily Bernie Sanders saying that. It's more so that after 40 years or 30 years of him saying the same thing, that it's now resonating for one reason or another.
Do you think that has to do with our generation? In some way?
I think it has to do with...
Or just people becoming more aware of the deeper issues with our politics.
I think there's a lot of angles you can take there. I think that you can talk about the social media age and how that has helped proliferate different ideas and different people's narrative and different people's identity into a space that can be recognized and then amplified by similar viewpoints. You can take into account how the privatization of so many things in our lives has left us feeling like we don't have control over our lives. You can look at student debt. You can look at the outlook for jobs.
Student debt's not fun.
Student debt is not a joke.
No,
it honestly isn't.
Yeah, we carved a pumpkin for Halloween that just had student loans on it because that was the scariest thing I could think of.
I mean, it is terrifying. I mean, we live it every day. So yeah, you can look to a lot of things, and I think that it just goes to show that when people are inspired and are impacted by something, there's three main options that they have. There's a book by, I think it's Diamond, I forget the first name. It's called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty, and it's basically an analysis of the three ways in which members of society in a political structure react to anything. And it's either they leave it, they just exit it, they feel like they just need to remove themselves from it. They voice their discontent or their assembly of unity under one voice, or they're loyal to the end. They're like, I'm gonna stick with this system, and it's highlighted, I think, really relevantly in the current space. It's just like people are just giving up. They're like, if Donald Trump wins, we're leaving this country. And you've seen that on Twitter. You hear it in like shows. Like, yeah, it's a real thing. People voice their discontent. You can see it in the protesting and the activism of like an entire generation. And there are people that are loyal to the end. They're diehard fans of the current normative, which is interesting to see in its own. So it's really about people's reaction, but it's also about like all the different ways that they can be upset about the system. Yeah.
I think it's almost important that no matter how good things get, no matter how good your country is, to never be fully content, to always at least be looking towards things that you could try and make better.
Definitely.
I think yeah.
I can definitely agree there. I think that if we are completely satisfied or think that everything is satisfactory, we just get caught in a trap. Yeah. It becomes a plutocracy. It becomes the autocratic mode where you look at, you're satisfied with like one leader, so like let's just keep him there. Yeah. But that's not how it works. Yeah. And that's not how it should work, because that person can feel a sense of complacency in what their system is and never adjust themselves. Yeah. So it's you'll see it reflected.
Yeah, you need a constant like change of ideas and ideals, and you need that diversity, and you need that freshness that new people can bring. Yeah. I think that's why it's important that America stays open to taking in refugees, because I mean that's what this country is basically built on, is taking in people from other places. And you can say, well, they're countries, we don't actually know all the background behind these people, it's not being vetted properly. Well, that's because we've spent like 20 years bombing these countries. They haven't had time to set up a good system to actually like get a good background check on anyone. And I just think you have to be an open place that fosters like new innovative ideas, and that comes from a diverse group of people.
Yeah, one of my favorite op-ed pieces that I've seen over the past like 5 years, because people forget how long this situation in Syria has been bubbling and moving, was this op-ed about what if we just sent every refugee into Detroit and gave them the place to just rebuild, because they would rebuild our cities. They would start their own businesses. They would contribute to their own community. They would build it up from the ground, and we can see that reflected in there's a city in like, I think it's like Deer Park, Minnesota, or somewhere out there in Minnesota that's just like the coldest place, and there's this huge Muslim community. It's like the largest Muslim community outside of the Middle East, and it's like they've built this amazing city. They've built halal-based like groceries, and
if you're an advocate of capitalism, I mean that's capitalism.
Yeah, that's how it works. Best. That's how it works. You give people the freedom and the ability to create their own market system, and their own buy-in and how they build. And if we do that in a place like Detroit that's just been abandoned by everyone else, that the standard in Detroit could be better than what people are experiencing somewhere else, and giving them the opportunity to build it even greater in the way that they want to, is I think much better than some billionaire buying up different districts and then selling it off to businesses and companies to like build up the downtown area. I think that's for me. And if it's even just the grassroots mobilization of people being able to do that, I think that is like so much more inspiring. Yeah. On a fundamental level. So it's like, yeah, we should, but let's also think about like what are the benefits, not like shoot down every possible negative that it could happen, because you can get a negative from everything. You can be like, why do we keep the same people in Atlanta and allow them to just be like quartered off and have like police like running through their neighborhood and raising the tension? Why do we allow that to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And then like let's mark off all the negatives to that.
Mm-hmm.
But if we marked off all the positives to what are the systems that are working to like better that? What are the ways that we can de-escalate that type of community? Like think about the positive deltas as opposed to like the negative deltas that can be impacted. I guess that's maybe just like a really positive outlook.
Yeah.
But,
no, I think it is super positive. It makes me think of there's this whole thing right now. So people are saying, oh, there's like climate change, and a lot of people are saying, well, let's not think about climate change. Let's think about system change.
Mm-hmm.
Let's think about changing the systems that are in place now that are affecting and causing climate change. And I think the same thing exists for our country and our politics and how we lead our lives, that we shouldn't just look at the negatives and the downsides. Let's look at the system as a whole and how it's set up and what is it in that system that we can actually change to create a better community all around. Mm-hmm. I think, for instance, like capitalism is it's a great system if it actually worked for everyone. The problem is most people don't get the same start in life, and they're just going to be beaten down by the system for many years and never even allowed to get that bigger chance. Like if you keep minimum wage not adjusting for inflation and actually getting to have like a living wage, you're not going to be able to get a higher education. You're not going to be able to pursue a career of like your choice, and you're just going to get caught up in the cycle. If you start getting into debt, then you're going to be defaulting, and then you're going to be in further debt, and you just get stuck in this rabbit hole.
Yeah, those are two really good points. Obviously, working at Corporate Accountability International, there's this idea that's really intrinsic to the work we do, which is changing systems, not symptoms.
Yeah.
And by changing the systems, you'll see that prolonged impact and that prolonged change that we need to see in the world. Mm-hmm. So when we're addressing like climate change, for instance, it's about changing everything that has to do with the current system of climate policy in a sense. And you can look at it from multiple aspects. One, the fact that fossil fuel industry lied about it for 30 some odd years while knowing about it, and in an attempt to bolster their industry against the effects of climate change, while at the same time funneling money into the political arena and like pushing back against regulations and funding climate deniers. Those two things don't match.
Yeah.
That doesn't change a system. That makes a system as seedy and negative and atrocious and egregious as it possibly can be. And by changing that system and stopping to allow that type of system to keep on going, and thinking about like what are the impact on people, what's happening to people in island nations, what's happening to these storms that are affecting Caribbean countries that have not seen storms or hurricanes turn course to their country in over 500 and 600 years.
Yeah.
Like, if we're not
that's the thing, like in America we're probably going to be some of the last ones to really experience the negative effects of climate change, but there's places all around the world that are being affected by it already.
Well, even in America we're just too privileged to feel the impacts.
We have homes that aren't going to blow down.
Yeah, and it's like, look at California. We're struggling in California. People are struggling. People have to change their entire lives. They have to invest $6,000 into changing their lawn so that it's like drought resistant. But when you think about it, you're like, holy crap, we're spending money as people on lawns.
Yeah.
People are spending money, governments are spending money to take all of their agricultural production, put it into a larger island that will most likely feel the effects of climate change so that they can feed their people. Renting plots of land because the salt water has toxified their land. So I think like that's the one point.
I think California is an interesting example of treating the symptom and not the actual issue.
Yeah.
Because I spent 3 months in Los Angeles doing an internship, and they were talking about doing this thing where if you went to a restaurant, they weren't just going to bring you a glass of water. You have to ask for a glass of water. And that was going to be the new big thing to help try and like conserve water. It's like, that doesn't really help that much in the grand scheme of things.
It gets me pretty frustrated on a very personal level. I like actually traveled to Haiti, and what I was doing there was setting up water filters in communities that are pretty much off the grid, kind of. They don't have like really basic systems. Their houses are built, but they're not gonna withstand another hurricane or another earthquake. And you know, one of the craziest things, there's so many crazy things that were down there, but one of the moments that it hit, it was actually right before I came back to start as an apprentice, and right before I started working on staff at the end of that summer. And I went to this area called, like, in Labadie, which is, right now Royal Caribbean actually has like a contract out there, and they have like this really nice, like, pristine area of the beach, and it's beautiful up there. People forget that like much of Haiti is amazing. It's a gorgeous country, and the people are amazing, and the culture is, it'll blow you away. And in Labadie, the most depressing thing to see was Royal Caribbean, who has a contract that they got from a dictator to like keep that there until like 2035. It's like some crazy number that they have this contract with them for, and there's this huge concrete deck like that they've built for when they're docking those giant ships. And that concrete could be used for the local community, but it's used for that. They could just duplicate that. It's not like an expense that would hurt them.
Yeah.
And then right next, money. Yeah, they definitely have enough money. They had sea-doos that they had to put away because someone like injured themselves and they couldn't like stand to have a lawsuit. So they just had all these nice brand new sea-doos like on the other side of this gated barbed wire, razor wire fence with another concrete wall 10 feet away, so like they were super secure. And they have all of this right next to this little strip of land that is used for the docking of the local community's boats, so they allow them to continue to have their boats so that they can use the main road to get like shipments of food into their community, rice, water, soda, what have you. It's like just whatever they want to get. And we took a ride on these like little kind of like tut-tut boats. They're like little small motor engine, and we go into this, I think it's Poisson. It's this little village, like little fishing village, and the water starts turning from like really clear to like brown, like dirt filled, because people are like funneling their garbage into the ocean because they have they have no system of like dumping garbage.
Wow. And
we're going by these like huge villas that Royal Caribbean has, and we go into this village, and it's beautiful from afar because it's got like, it looks like the community had actually painted it that way so that they have like a sense of pride for their village. And as soon as we get on there, everything changes because you were so far away, it looked beautiful, and then you get there and it's like, you know, the paint is chipping off. These are dilapidated buildings in the back. There's garbage in streams. There's kids that are walking around with like no underwear, and they've got like these tiny little t-shirts, and that's it. If they've got that. There's like flies like everywhere around food. It's just a whole different world. And it's a few 100 yards away from this like Royal Caribbean dock.
Wow.
And there was like this open well where things were just dropping into, and it just pumps right up to these houses. And there was these kids with like extended bellies, and it's not from like starvation. They were pretty well fed because the community made sure to feed them, but the water had like worms in it and different parasites. And right around the corner in this one house, there was these giant things of like bottled water and Coca-Cola. And I was like, how do you guys even have this? you have like a water system down there, and like it's not anything, but you can buy like water. And I was kind of upset, but I didn't like respond in that way. But that's what I was feeling internally. And I asked one of the local leaders there, and he's like, "Oh, they give that to us for free." And I was like, "Who gives that to you for free?" And they're like, "Nestle and Coca-Cola. They have vendors." And it was just the moment where they like give them stuff for free, so they feel like they need that, and then they go back and buy it, and then they get free stuff again, and then they go back and buy it.
Yeah.
And it's like given out from like USAID and all these other organizations, and it's like not thinking about the long-term impact. That's like you're building this kind of culture around this thing that they don't actually need to buy, but that should be invested.
Yeah, they should have a system in place to get clean water for themselves. Someone should be helping them do that, not just giving them water and then they become reliant on it. There was a big thing in Honduras again. There was a bunch of people going down there. You know, getting clean water is really hard in a lot of countries, and people were giving them these boxes that could actually turn dirty water into clean water. It was this really like intricate system. But they weren't spending any time to actually teach them about proper sanitation. And so people were taking the clean water, but they were putting it into their dirty cups. And so now the water's just dirty all over again. So I think it has to start with education. And again, like trying to actually change systems and investing into systems and infrastructure, and not just giving people water, because that's just like a Band-Aid.
It is.
And I think it kind of ties back into our conversation of the current presidential campaign really well, because I think what we need is a leader who's going to actually try and change systems and not just treat the symptoms. And I think someone like Donald Trump is looking at people's fears, and he's telling you how he's going to treat those symptoms. Well, we're going to put a wall. We're going to stop refugees, you know. And I think those things, that's just treating the symptom, and that's not creating any long-term change. But I think what we need is a leader who's actually going to try and change the systems from the inside out.
Yeah, I think that this country not only deserves, and that's kind of like an entitled way to speak about it, but also needs a direction that is outside of what we've experienced. And for me also, there's this idea of how do we as people, as regular citizens and members of this society, reclaim the power of our voices and reclaim the power of like what we can stand to do? Because we can elect the next president and then not turn out to vote for local elections. And then, you know, you've got places like Utah where the local Congress there, the state Congress, has put in more like discriminatory bills over the past like 4 years than any president could ever push forward in Congress. You've got Mississippi where people are getting voter turnout laws that are so clearly racist and like are shutting only black communities. When you look at the map, it's like they're shutting down the DMVs in only black communities. And they're not even pulling punches about it. And they know that they can do that because the local voter turnout is not going to be high. Because one, they've implemented the system, and two, because as a nation, we don't turn out to local elections. And I think that that is also, in a very strong sense, an indication of how very weak we feel. And I don't know if it's kind of like this, I don't know if there's like something innate or psychological or subconscious, but I feel like we think of like the president as this like really big role, and we're going to vote for that person that's going to change everything. But there's no commitment beyond that. There's no commitment in organizations that are local and community sustained projects. But I think that's changing, and I think that we have to like hold on to that. We have to hold on to all these communities that are being so forward thinking and thinking about reinvestment in community, co-op programs, grocery stores that are co-op, which is huge in low-income communities. You've got vegan restaurants that are trying to offer healthy options in these food deserts where McDonald's dominates every corner and there's only the local convenience store, the bodega, that are the only two options for food and groceries. So the presidential elections are supremely important.
Yeah.
But I think that the one thing we can take away from any candidacy is the fact that we do need to feel that sense of power and voice and change that we can have. Because if we don't have that and we don't hold on to that, we are going to lose in the long run. And it's all of us.
I really hope if anything comes out of this current election, it's that a lot of people realize, people that are holding on to these old ideas of like what America used to be, and especially a lot of the ideas that like the top 1% have, is that not only our generation, but anyone who's been discriminated against, any race of people who's been marginalized in this country, I hope that if anything comes out of this election, it's that people realize that the people that think that they're the majority currently are actually the minority, and that there's a much larger majority of people who want some really significant change to happen in this country. I think, if anything, that's being proven currently, and I think as it comes time closer to the actual election, that'll really come to fruition. People will realize that. And I think that's a great positive change, even if the person who could actually make those kind of changes possible isn't elected. At least we've started that conversation, and at least it's becoming more clear who the majority in this country are and who actually are calling for real positive, forward-thinking change.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing message, and if that's the one that gets out there, I think that we have so much to be not only hopeful, but tangibly we can see and affect. So that's really powerful. And I think that another thing is the idea of like these communities that feel discriminated against, the outliers, the different minority classes within America, and that includes the LGBTQ community, that includes the Black communities, Hispanic communities, mixed race communities, Native, Indigenous communities. There needs to be more of a sense of unity, I think. And I think that just the way that we feel like we've been discriminated against, or for me, I've got like a few different minority groups within myself, in that I'm an immigrant, I'm mixed race, and I was low income when I came into this country, and I have been for quite a number of years. And I was the first person in my close family to go to college. So for me, it's this idea that we don't all just fit into one of those. And we don't all just, even if we do feel like we just fit into one of those, the things that we feel like innately that hurt, that just like feeling like you're being pushed back against, that feeling of loneliness, other people are facing that. And as we grow in smaller communities towards that, and as we feel that unity, I think that can be reflected in our politics and our society. And there's a power in that. And I think that a lot is on the shoulders of this younger generation, because a lot of the older folks that have felt this way, these progressive liberals that have been aligned with that don't have those ill feelings that we get to see publicized of like people with white hair who are in their older ages being really angry and active about all these like issues, and you think that that's everyone in that community. It's really not. It's just that they feel tired. They've been doing it for so long, and there's a lot on the shoulders of the not just younger progressive, but the younger conservatives that want to see a better world. We don't have to just clash heads every single time that there's an issue. We can identify where we're differing. We can identify that there's a faith community that you feel allegiance to, and a certain doctrine and scripture that you adhere to. But that does not mean that you are any less of a guide to your own life as I am with the things that I believe in. And that's like the beauty of it all, isn't it? That we're bringing all these different perspectives, and finally, when we come together and we realize where we're similar and where we're bone to bone, just so similar. Like we're elementally the same. I think that's the trigger. That's just like the switch where we just become like a better world. And it's not just Americans. It's like the entire globe needs to start this, and pretty soon.
Hopefully,
hopefully that's definitely the hope. Is like we need to see this really, really soon.
I think that's a great way to end it.
I think so, man.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, man. That was great.
Thank you, buddy.
Awesome.
Awesome.
See you guys.